Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final discussion of the day. My name is Jessica Craig. I am a developer advocate with feature management platform LaunchDarkly. For anyone unfamiliar with LaunchDarkly and what we do, we give product delivery teams the power to move fast without breaking things through the use of feature flagging. So today I've got the pleasure of hosting our last discussion of the day. So we're going to focus on, we're going to talk about migration projects. We're going to talk about the real world complexities and the problems that come up. We'll be hearing from a group of engineers and engineering managers that have worked with a whole host of these kinds of projects to date. So we want to keep this discussion as interactive as possible. So please drop any questions or comments or thoughts that you have for our panelists in the chat. I'll be checking that after our initial discussion. So we'll be kicking off with some introductions. We'll be talking through our discussion with some pre-prepared questions, and then finally we're going to have a final session of wrap up and Q&A. So if that sounds good, without further ado, let's kick off the introductions. So panelists, please can you introduce yourselves, give us a little bit about your role, what you do and where you work. Henry, would you like to go first as my work?
Yeah, sure, love to. Hello, DashCon. My name is Henry Barrow. I'm an engineering manager on the integrations team at LaunchDarkly, and I'm based out of London. I've been with LaunchDarkly for a bit over 2 years in various roles, including on the backend services team. So I've had a whole host of experience dealing with migration projects that involve feature flags in LaunchDarkly.
Excellent. Then should we move on to Bishwa?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Bishwa. My name is Bishwa Kukan. I work at Datadog as a site reliability engineer. Before coming here, I also worked in various companies, different size, as the same role. I work at Datadog in a core resilience team, so my work and my team's work we work around everything that involves incidents, so incident response, retrospective, and remediation. We kind of help the whole organization to build more resilience from both people, processes, and technical challenges. We also help people and organization to kind of organize large-scale game days where we practice chaos engineering and kind of try to prepare ourselves for unexpected events as much as possible. And that's about it.
Excellent, thanks so much. And finally, we're joined by a joint customer of ours, actually. Nick, would you like to take the stage?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Nick Donahue. I'm a software engineer at StockX on the platform engineering team, where, among many things, we focus on infrastructure, tooling, reliability, quality throughout the engineering organization. We're always looking to improve our processes, roll out new tools that help with deployments and migrations like Datadog and LaunchDarkly, and a whole bunch of other projects. And before this, I've actually come from a software development experience. I was actually on the front ender for a long time, and then moved more into the back end. I've actually used LaunchDarkly as well, rolling out features in the front end capacity as well in a previous role.
Nice. Well, I mean, that sounds like you've had plenty of experience with migration projects, potentially. Would you like to kick us off with talking about your experiences?
Sure. Yeah, there's a number of anecdotes that I could definitely share. Like on the front end, we use LaunchDarkly to progressively roll out new features on in our UIs to actually show stakeholders, like product managers, other engineers, leadership, new changes without affecting production, but still allowing us to ship to production, but underneath flags. And it's also been useful for us to progressively roll out features in order to test performance of those features. That in order to mitigate any potential performance issues that could come up with a really complex project. That we can roll it out, then we can roll it back to a much smaller subset, fix the performance issues that we might have seen, and then roll it back to the original number to test it. So using flags and kind of observing them with Datadog has been critical for us to ensure quality.
Nice. Does anyone want to follow up with? I mean, obviously on the observability front, we've got Bishwa from Datadog. What have your experiences been like with migration projects?
Yeah, it's more chaotic, I guess, than we usually hope for. So you're never like extremely ready for it because you just go through something unknown, although you really work hard on kind of what are the things that would indicate you things are going well. So one of the things that I actually find it really hard to kind of come up with some metrics to show and indicate that your migration and anything that you're migrating to is going well and a bit successful. And sometimes we expect that the tools that we have would show us anything that goes badly. But most of the time, we actually need to do a lot more work on creating certain metrics, certain tools, and use the tools as much so that shows us more about how we are doing. So we shouldn't look always on, okay, if just the error metrics are good, things are going well, but most of the time we need to come up with new stuff, especially if we are changing a lot of things at once. So actually, I'm curious about Nick's experience, if they come up with new metrics when they are doing certain migrations and how they, what is his experience on that, preparing the observability side of the migration compared to before?
Sure. I think we tend to think of observability and progressive rollouts as as a philosophy really that can be expressed with the tooling that we're using. One thing that I've noticed that I developed through my career is you kind of go from making a change and and rolling it out in its entirety without things progressive rollout tools, and you kind of hope for the best. You really hope that it's not going to break, or there was some unknown that we didn't anticipate beforehand, and that's always makes really nervous. So what we do instead at StockX is we instead of just going by like, oh, did it work or did it not, we actually look for more details about like what exactly is it that what specific metrics are we looking to see? Some number of requests per second based on our current usage patterns, and we do a lot of upfront work in order to make sure that the what we're seeing, say, in Datadog in our metrics is reflective of the outside reality. That's even before we make the change. And so then when we go to progressive rollout of change, we can say, oh, well, we expect this number to be this high. If it's rolled out 100%. So if we roll out to 20%, then we'll see, potentially it'd be about, this, that 20% of what the maximum value would be. And if we think, and everything's working on that small scale, then that gives us more confidence to roll out the change for a much larger audience. But it's that active, I guess, measurement and finding the right metrics that allow us to actually get a much more comprehensive view of reality, especially in a very complex system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the hard work there.
I was going to say that element of control.
Yeah, I wanted to step in and kind of step off of what Nick said here. One project that's kind of top of my mind recently is a company-wide movement of migrating pieces of data from a couple different data stores, including MongoDB, over to CockroachDB. So with that kind of project, it's really important to put together the metrics ahead of time that you really care about. And for something like a data migration, it's all about data consistency between the databases. So we spent a lot of time investing in tooling and libraries that our application code uses to verify the consistency between the data, and then send that up to Datadog. And Datadog made it really easy to build kind of generalized dashboards, and then we could substitute in template variables to see how well each of our collections are doing. And then on top of that, you can leverage some of our LaunchDarkly integrations to see like when is the flag changing. Are we migrated 10%? Are we migrated 90%? What is the consistency like? It's being able to see that whole view. It gives you a lot of comfort that things are going well. Of course, I'm sure Bishwa will be happy to weigh in on when things don't go well, or when you can't plan for everything. So it's important to build out the chaos engineering and take it to a step further to really get confidence.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually how you test that. It's really good point that you already said you used application metrics actually to both compare both performances on two different DBs, because you're on a two different software, even though your data is the same. But it's really good point to actually create metrics from the application point of view, because that is the user of the both DB, and that's how you can get actually proper metrics to compare if what the application needs or the user's needs are completed, even though you use two different software. So that's a really good point, I think. But how did you prepare for, actually, did you do any chaos engineering, or how did you start testing that move?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it came with taking a small piece of data that was less risky. That's kind of where we started with something a little smaller. Turned out to not be the most straightforward migration piece because of how our queries were written. But we started small and tried to build the library around that as we went. So I think the team was really smart about building in time to learn, and also doing progressive rollouts, discovering things. When things don't go right, well, then you have to kind of take a step back and see if you can identify metrics that might indicate things heading south, and then try again. So it's this phased rollout. Sometimes it takes a couple attempts to get it right, but being in control is really important.
It actually tends to remind me a little bit of one of our progressive rollout projects that we did. Was when we were moving towards GraphQL for some of our most used pages. And what would happen is, GraphQL, we set up a whole GraphQL API that would interact with our system in a very different way than it was used to. When it was long term, it was a huge improvement for us. But we had the potential for being kind of shaky at first if we roll it out to everyone. So what we did is we rolled it out to a small subset of our users, and we noticed in these parts of our queries they were performing suboptimally. And so what we would do is we roll it back down to to zero, or a very small subset, and then fix those issues, and then roll it back out to the original number, and test our changes and our fixes from there. And if everything went well, then we'd increase the number and repeat the process. And we actually repeated that process 2 or 3 times before we ended up rolling it out fully.
Nice. I was going to say the element of, it's cool how the element of control has stayed pretty consistent within your approach. Is like resilience and maintaining that element of control kind of central to the way that you run these projects?
They are.
Or do you have something else?
And we. Oh yeah. No, I'd say resilience is is obviously it's very important for us. I would say there's, at the end of the day, there's really no production like production, and we're not always known ahead of time what could potentially happen, even if when we do all that legwork around like what we think is going on. And so having fail safes in place can really help, especially when you're in the process of doing a migration. And if you use a flag for to roll out a big change, you already get that switch for free, because you can always roll back down to previous number if you kept that flag around. We have explored also using flags to potentially turn off features in case there's a lot of traffic for any reason whatsoever. Fortunately, we actually haven't really had to use those flags at all very often, and because we usually prefer to go with the philosophy of it should just work anyway. So instead of setting up a bunch of fail-safe flags, kind of like a circuit breaker flags to just shut something off in case that we need to, we'll ask ourselves, do we even really need this in the first place at all? And can we actually make that more efficient instead of having that flag option? But for rolling out features, having that's been very helpful.
And I think also building resilience from the user's point of view is also quite on the game. That's why also we work a lot on the process work in the organization too. And this is important in the migration projects as well. When you're doing or planning for a big migration, you also think a lot about how people are going to interact with this migration. How transparent we need to do this for all the stakeholders that are actually involved in this product. When I say stakeholders, I usually talk about engineers within the organization that are using the project. So building resilience also means that building enough tools so that that's also a little bit of control too, for people to know that, okay, for the new build products should only use the newly migrated one so that you can actually kill the other one when we are done. So there's a lot of consideration and complexity in terms of how we're gonna involve all the other teams that are maybe not doing the migration itself, but depends on the migration a lot. So that's one thing that looks easier, but I think it's one of the most complex part of the migration projects too, to make sure that people understand the new system and know how to use the new system, and they should not use the old system. You need to build a lot of tooling around that, because then you lower the cognitive load. That's the only way to have a little bit control and actually give the platform to people that they feel safe with the migration you are doing, so that they can have some buy-in in the project. So eventually, hopefully, you complete the migration.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think it's, getting buy-in from everyone at the company that it affects is really important, and different people require different pieces of information to convince them that doing this migration is what the company needs to do. Oftentimes these migrations are really slow, and that's because they're scary and potentially risky, and they shouldn't be rushed. So being able to get buy-in, being able to convince people that, hey, we need to do this because it's going to provide, XYZ for our users, or because it's going to cut costs by 10x, that's really important. And then tying onto that, the training aspect is really important. Being able to go to the people that are going to be working on these systems in the future and outlining, like, here's how you work with this new tool or new system or new database. Here's why we did it. Here's how you use it now. All of that's really important, and it's important to get kind of early involvement if possible, I would say.
Yeah, and on top of that, now it just made me think that it's really important to create observability on the process. How many teams are started actually migrating, if you are depending on them, right? For example, for DB, they need to maybe change their queries differently because suddenly it's a different type of query language, or they need to optimize it differently. So you actually depend on them for migration. For that, you actually need to build some observability on, okay, how many teams are already in? Why is these teams are taking longer time to actually migrate, and how can we help them? So you need metrics on how you are doing to actually towards the end, which we, I think, neglect a lot most of the time. And then it feels like it's going forever, the migration, because people just don't adopt easier. Yeah.
As our observability expert, Bishwa, like I remember we were speaking before, and you mentioned the importance of documentation in this process, and I know that you hinted to that when you were just talking about the buy-in process. But like, what sort of how do you go about making documentation that or creating documentation that can serve several parts of the business for these kinds of projects?
Yeah, it's actually a really it's a really good point to touch upon, because yeah, as we said, that for migration, for any big project, you actually have different types of users and stakeholders, and for my experience, they need different type of documentation. So if the team is depending on this particular new tool that I'm migrating to, and they need to adapt to it, then I'm going to write a documentation about how they can plug into it. But if there is a user support and using my team as a user on the UI, then if there are some changes on it, then I need to write different kind of documentation for their own usage. So you need to think these separate stakeholders and how they are affected by the change, and how they can make their workflow similar to what it was before, and to convey that information that doesn't scare them, and show them that, hey, you can still continue, and hopefully it's a bit easier now, but here is how different it is for you compared to how different it is for other team. That's I found it quite important, actually, to create enough transparency for and give enough information, just enough information for different groups for the same changes that you're actually doing at heart in your team.
Nice. And of course, like with different users come different surprises. I mean, I'm not going to call them issues or outages, even though I probably should. But have there been any surprises that have cropped up that maybe like you've recovered well from? Any like painful lessons that you've learned? I don't want to use the word pain particularly, but any like important lessons I say that you've learned. Anyone feel free to jump in on this one, by the way.
I mean, one small thing that comes to mind is, something that tends to somewhat be an afterthought is making sure everyone's dev setups are working. So you've done the migration on production, but you might have forgotten to actually update the local dev environment, something like that. That's come up in the past, where all of a sudden you're blocking people because their local dev no longer works. Because you think you've successfully migrated everything. So, I think that connects well with what Bishwa was saying, is making sure all of the people and teams that are affected by the change have what they need to do to continue to deliver value. So it's often a holistic approach where you have to think, who's actually being affected by this? Is it just my team? Is it everyone at the company? What kind of granularity do you need to provide? And one thing I think that we've started to have success with is with these bigger company-wide initiatives, trying to allocate some time where, if you're the team leading the migration project, after the migration's complete, you kind of have to build in some time where your team now is kind of the support point for that. So people are inevitably going to have problems. So make sure that you're supporting the migration even after you think it's done.
Yeah, after you think it's done, I was going to say that the concept of finished can mean a lot of different things to different people. Has the idea of when do you feel a migration project is truly finished? You said, Henry, that like it's usually after you expect it to be finished, but yeah.
I mean, since I work at LaunchDarkly, I'd say when the feature flag is removed from your code.
Nice.
Or you actually deprecate the oldest thing. So even you might think that no one is using that anymore, but you never know until you actually delete it and see if anyone screams that they were actually using it, that you kind of miss. I'm pretty sure this happened to everyone on this call. Yes. So yeah, for me, it's actually, it's new code uses a new system, and old code is really gone. Like it's not just there. You don't get pages about it anymore. That could be a good start as well. Killing slowly. You don't create alerts. You don't create alerts for the old system anymore. That's a good indication, right? Because
That's
that old
true.
system should be gone by now if no one is using. But if I'm creating new alerts or if I'm answering pages, that means that I still need to babysit it. And that's a good indication that it's not over.
Despite wanting it to be over.
Well, that's where the metrics come in. Is
Yeah.
you can see that it's no longer being used, and I guess we can safely cut it. But even then, you'd still want to put it behind a flag, potentially.
Yeah.
Have you, Nick? Have you ever been influenced by like product lifecycle for StockX, like in terms of like phasing your workloads? It's just
Yeah, I'd say. Well, in a lot of ways, my customer has actually been the engineering organization at StockX. So because we're an internally facing team as opposed to a service team, which usually works on more user facing features. But a lot of what you guys were saying just now really kind of reflects, my experience with not just migrating a particular feature in a tactical sense by using a flag to make a code change, but actually to get more meta here is actually rolling out LaunchDarkly to our engineering org. And in order to do that, that was more of an organizational migration. Migration was the technical one, even though there was a lot of technical aspects to it. And I would joke while I was doing this that I was actually doing a lot more writing than I was actually coding. It wasn't a joke. Because you have to get the organizational buy-in, you have to find the different stakeholders that are involved, and you have to sell it to people. Because it's not enough to just roll out a tool and say like here you go, go be free and use this, and this is how we think you should use it, and then expect people to start doing it. You have to overcome organizational momentum. And that's not a bad thing at all. That exists for a reason. But you need to show people that this is the better path forward and how that works, while people are in the midst of shipping code. And when you're in an environment where downtime is very bad, of course, which is true for all of us. It's very easy to continue shipping things the way that you're used to doing them. So what we did is we had a whole evangelism process around LaunchDarkly, where and it's actually mirrored the rollout for a lot of other projects too. It could have been Datadog. It could have been more recently our service catalog tool that that we wanted everyone to use, but we had to make sure that people were sold on the idea. So we actually even established like metrics around how many LaunchDarkly flags that we saw in use. We actually in Datadog we have a whole dashboard about like there's a number of flags we have. Here's the number of flags we have in this status, and we can use that to actually like identify potential issues that we saw, like we were saying before, like the last step of a migration is removing the flag. And if we start seeing a whole number of flags that are in that launch state, move upwards, then we know that there's a few people that need to clean up their flags, and so how do we solve that problem? And we use that, and we measure that quantitatively. If we can see like we made a change, we might make a email notification that says, "Hey, please clean up your flags," and then we see that number of launched flags go down. Then we know what we've done is working. And so we actually treat the migrations to the tools themselves the same way that we treat a more tactical user-facing migration.
Nice. I love that, working with realism in mind.
Yeah, I really like that, and I would like to add, sometimes on the way towards the end, you need to start recognition and celebrating a bit, especially if you want people to move in faster. So it's really great to show how many feature flags are there so that you actually have the metrics to follow up how the migration is going. and how people are following up. But what has been also really helpful in my experience was like, hey, this team now finished everything and this is how much they got out of it. Some success stories, some recognition on the ones that actually put their hands under the stone and actually did the migration at first and get some stuff out, right? Just to kind of create a little bit joyful atmosphere that we are doing this for anything. We are either doing this for handling technical debt or leveraging our technical usage. Like, it's always for good, right? And how do we actually make it about good? Because we are all very comfortable with the problems we know. Like, we are comfortable with it because we know how to handle it. And the new things are scary, although they are shiny. But when someone is migrating, I think it's really important to show that progress, but also show the recognition and a little bit of celebration towards the end, so that it makes it easier for humans to adapt. Because at the end, we are all like humans that handles those machines and need some motivation too.
Yes,
Totally
love that.
And I think one of the best ways to tell that success story is to feed in some metrics. So if you've been capturing the migration process the whole time, hopefully you have some metrics for success that you laid out from the beginning. And then when you cap the project off, write a blog post or share that amongst the team and celebrate that win and include some of the Datadog metrics that you've captured. I think that can really tell a much stronger story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very sort of in line with that sort of. Go for it, Henry. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was saying just quick thing. Getting rid of a flag. Some of my favorite PRs that I've shipped.
Nice.
It's just a one or two lines sometimes.
It's like deleting code.
Like, wow, we're done. Yeah. Little cap on the end.
One fun thing we started doing at LaunchDarkly is we have quarterly focus weeks, and during that time, it's usually centered around KTLO projects, but we have an award we call the Golden Dustpan, and it's awarded to the person that removes the most feature flags in that week. And it's actually a physical award. Back before COVID times, we would actually get that inscribed and put it on someone's desk. So
nice.
This reminded me, actually, I have a flag that's hanging around right now.
What is it, Nick?
Oh, I was just saying, that reminds me, I have a flag hanging around right now I actually need to get rid of today. Totally forgot about it.
See, look, discussions are useful. We're serving as an addendum to the to-do list.
And my email notifications have been bugging me about it too.
Your email notifications are bugging you. Have you got automated?
No, I'm the one that wrote the email notifications too. And it's bugging. I'm like, I'll do it tomorrow.
That's a good thing about actually being the user for the thing that you create. So you can make it better. If it's an annoying email notification, and you're like, why is this too bad? Too many.
I got a few complaints from the email notification, but the flag on the launch flag count did go down, so the results speak for themselves.
By any means necessary.
If you guys actually have any ideas on how to encourage folks to remove flags while we're on that topic, I think that would actually be very helpful to me.
Sure. Well, we actually have a couple features that are built in with this in mind. So one is our code references. So if you haven't set that up, that's a great way to see if a flag is actually being referenced anywhere in your code. So it's a GitHub action or Circle CI or any kind of CI script. It's open source. It'll scan your code for references to feature flags. So you can look at the code references tab in LaunchDarkly and see, okay, the code's no longer referencing this flag. It's time to clean it up. That's one tool we have for that. And also, if you're using our Slack app, we've actually built a similar stale flag notification, similar to what you've done with your emails, Nick, to notify users that it's time to clean up their flags. They've been launched or they're no longer referenced in code.
Also, one
I should
other
probably
thing
do
that
but I probably get chased out of town. People are annoyed enough. Sorry, Bishwa. Go ahead.
Yeah, other thing that I found it useful about making people do things that are good for them, but not necessarily moving as fast, is that making it more interactive. Sometimes emails can be boring. It's automated email. I know that. I don't take it serious. I don't take it sincerely. And I might even create a filter for that, push them to the folder. Luckily, I don't do that. But yeah, for me, Slack notification worked. If I make Slack notifications, for example, or any kind of whatever messaging tool you're using, make them answer to that. That could work. Sometimes, for example, we have a little bot about people filling out the details about incidents, like, for example, what team was affected, and
Nice.
what products were affected. How do we make this happen? And if I send an email, it's a little bit, I have lower chances for people to answer to that. But if I send a Slack message, also this is important, to kind of a channel. So it's not like a person for to say, but it's more like a team that's responsible of it, or to the channel that most of the people were involved. So there's a little bit more transparent communication, what needs to be done and why it is helpful. That's also helping when something comes directed to me. Sometimes it might feel a little bit too much to do. But if it's on a team channel, I know that it's my team's responsibility, then it feels a little bit. I'm just, talking based on my experience. There's no scientific facts about this works. But
No, I like it.
yeah, but making it more interactive. This is for any platform work, making it more interactive in terms of how much information you need from people. That helps a little.
I love that. And it also it helps to it goes back to that thing that you were saying around making sure the purpose of your overall project is really hyper visible to your team. Everyone knows exactly why you're doing this, so they can contextualize it as, okay, this is an additional cognitive load, but it is necessary to reach the shared goal, which will be excellent once we all get to it.
Yeah.
Do you have reminders on your Slack notifications, so if people don't answer them, they come back again and produce another alert?
Yeah, bot would answer, hey, looks like I couldn't get enough information from you last time. Would you mind looking at me again? Maybe some other kind of language, even that would help. I don't know. Yeah, it does. It bugs you until you do it. That's that. But it's easier than email.
That's true.
Yes.
And the thing is that I kind of hate being in that position. Is that you don't want to be that person, just having to bug everyone, extra piece of work that they don't want to do. So I feel like the best way to encourage, I don't know if I can solve that problem entirely, but instead of trying to get people to think, we try and make that part of our larger life cycle for a flag. So we I always use the term flag life cycle as opposed to using flags, because it's just saying using a flag means like, oh, it's there, we're using it, we can use it anytime we want. But when we structure, it's like we're talking about the flag life cycle. That and creating a PR that just has the flag in it and an empty if statement and a log maybe, and then developing your feature out from there and shipping that under the flag, and then iterating on that, and then when you're in that done state, then removing that flag. But if we consider it itself, it takes people down position in the first. It's not perfect, but I think it's the best approach we've done so far.
Yeah, it's right. You still need to find the right. You still need to find the right balance on, if I'm nagging people too much and they don't answer it, then you need to think about. You need to go back to drawing board and say, okay, what am I doing differently here, and I can do it different. So I definitely agree that you don't want to be the person who just nags people to fill in things, and it goes into the same annoyance at the end. But yeah, it's good to find that balance, but also ask a little bit about, do people really, if people don't answer it for a while, I would really think if I made it clear enough that this is important, did I actually get the buy-in or not?
Yeah.
I am not
Definitely.
sure. Yeah.
Definitely, because your biggest
No,
your
it's
biggest
absolutely right.
indication is I remember reading this somewhere recently. So one portion of desired user behavior is that people just use your product, they use your service, and they consume it, and you see the metrics speaking for themselves. I love that we've ended up in this sort of human impact of DevOps kind of place. It really reminds me of the sort of the latest results of the kind of state of DevOps report, which is talking about how the best performing teams work to like define the interactions they have with each other, and that seems exactly what you're doing with with creating those like notifications around flag lifecycle, around the actual like with tracking the usage of your new tool and your new service. Yeah, we're kind of getting towards the end of our discussion. Actually, I mean, I don't want to cap anything off. Does anyone have any kind of final thoughts they want to land on, or any stories they wanted to bring up?
No, I think we're ready for questions,
Well, I actually
or
haven't
whatever
seen
else
some.
comes next. I'm sorry.
I know it's all good. Take the wheel. No. The Henry, have you got any final closing remarks you wanted to mention, or Nick or Bushra?
Okay. Closing remarks with regards to the overall topic of the discussion today. I would say, um, for me, when you're talking about a migration project, I think it's really important to think of it as a phased project. So don't try to do everything at once. Like most hard engineering projects, you can typically break it into smaller pieces. So divide and conquer. But yeah, try to phase things out and take your time. Don't rush. Be methodical, and of course, don't go in blind. So, you know, get your metrics set up. If you find they're not set up correctly the first time, take a step back, do it over again. But you want to be in control, and you want to be able to measure the output of the work you're doing.
Nice.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And do the work beforehand. Don't rush. Feel grounded a little bit on the work that you're doing. Do the homework of involving all the other stakeholders. Share the document of the plan. Let them decide. Actually, if you cannot assume everything, so you can actually get a lot of feedback from the stakeholders before you start. So do a little bit more legwork before. And also, one thing I wanted to close with, also make them a bit normal and easy to practice. So you can think of smaller migration projects. This doesn't have to be all rewrite. This doesn't have to be whole new database. It can be that you break into big database in a smaller database, right? So that we need to be exercising migrations and not make them really big and scary. And it's easy to see them in the day. I mean, any new deploy is kind of a very small migration, right? It's just that we all agreed that the previous version is just gonna die right away, and we all tolerate that. Like we all agree there's a contract there. So I just would like to see us exercise that more, and not at the end becomes that it's sort of a huge migration project that we need to put up with.
Love that. Love that. I was going to say I didn't want to break up the discussion earlier because we stumbled across some really great anecdotes, insight stories. But one of the questions I was going to ask and that we were going to have was going to be around where do you start with migration projects? So maybe Nick, if you've got some closing thoughts, and if not, do you want to kind of talk about where you start with a project?
Yeah. Well, it's actually segues pretty well in kind of the closing remarks too. Is one thing we say at StockX is when you're shipping any kind of change, we call it CPV, and it's communicate, plan, and validate. And each of those three things are extremely important. First you communicate your intentions, you get buy-in, you make sure that your changes are working in concert with everyone else's changes that you might know or not know about. And then you plan, you come up with the with the right metrics that you're looking for, your methodology for it. We'll write an RFC around it. We'll get feedback on that RFC. We'll look at this is the definition of done, and this is how we work towards doing that. And these are the things that we want to measure out of that, and then validate at the end of the change. You compare with what you see in your monitoring tool like Datadog with what you expect. And if things are what you expect, great, you can continue the rollout. If things aren't what you expect, then you want to scale it back and figure out why that's the case and fix what needs to be fixed. But that's just a constant process of communicate, plan, and validate.
Nice. I love that approach. Actually, might need to noted that down. I might need to share that with the team when we go. Or might need to adapt some kind of form of that. I'm sure Henry, your team has got a sort of a similar approach, and Bishwa, the kind of the feedback. I'm sure you define the feedback loops.
Gonna steal the acronym.
Definitely.
All right.
Or
yeah,
speaking of,
I love that too.
Yeah, it's so good, isn't it? Well, speaking of the definition of done, I think we are done. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Bishwa. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Henry. And cheers, everyone, for taking part. This closes off
Jessica,
your DashCon.
And thanks, everyone.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.